you can either unmute yourself or type in a question. I have a question, Mike. I know one of our first webinars was on the FEMA, getting people get FEMA grants. And I know that some members are looking at that. Do you have any sort of suggestions you have on terms of how do you account for that, you know, in the accounting world?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to FEMA grants or similar to you know, even some of the stimulus dollars that I know came out last week, I think being able to track those in separate general ledger accounts and kind of account for it on its own, I think you'll probably be a little bit more work on the front end, but I think our anticipation is if you have to demonstrate how you spent those dollars, you're not commingling it with kind of your normal operating cash. So you're able to carve that out. So I know we've got several clients that have kind of set up a COVID department, and they're trying to get as much cost attributable to that, whether it's labor or supplies or those types of things in those accounts, just because we don't know what the regulatory side of it may ask for from demonstrating how we use those dollars later.
We had a question come up. Have you done similar analysis for assisted living?
We have not to this point, and part of it's because it's of the public data that may or may not be available. And so we really focused on the skilled nursing because we had all the cost report data available to us. And, you know, it's probably the area where we know there's probably the thinnest of margins. So, you know, census, and not to say assisted living doesn't, but census can definitely drive, you know, a bigger part of the financial implications.
Looking at, I just flipped it back to this one slide about the Texas data. Is there a way to sort of focus this down to individual facilities, like an average of what they would lose?
So we have that kind of at a facility level. I think, I'm happy to share it, but I think probably the one caution when we look at it is, you know, especially if you think of kind of the life plan community that has the continuum, we size really one aspect of the business. And so to the extent that, you know, you've got good occupancy in IL or good occupancy in AL, that may offset some of this. So I think we can help size it at the facility level. But I think like all of this, we're really looking at what's the relevant range and how do you potentially dial this in or out depending on factors that influence you.
Similarly, another question, I guess everyone wants data, the home health and hospice. I know some of that's publicly available. Any analysis on that?
We're working on that. And I think as we get that, we can share it. But we're trying to do the same. You know, part of the reason we focused on skilled nursing to start with was, you know, we know there's the capital component where with home health, you know, you don't have as much of the capital, but we'll continue to look at that and we can share that as that becomes available.
Okay. Other questions? I know one of the things you mentioned was staff reductions and things like that, but it also seems like this is the time when people are in dire need of staff. So how do you sort of maybe repurpose staff to do different things, or how do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at this industry, you know, probably when I went through kind of, well, here's the 8 buckets to consider. I don't know that staffing would be the first one I'd have, because I think when you think of staffing for care, I mean, it's, you know, we need to still staff to a level to make sure we take care of our residents. Mm-hmm. I do think the repurposing piece to say, you know, how do you get creative with some of those things is an opportunity. But I think there's probably as much as I can look at the financial component of this, there's probably the other side of it, which is really from a compliance and regulatory, you know, that I don't know that I don't know that I want to be advising anything that, you know, puts residents at risk or care at risk. I mean, I think there's a balancing act in this. I mean, my anticipation when we looked at cost is capital is probably the first bucket to look at, because it's easier maybe to delay some capital than the labor side.
Okay. And just another, this presentation is going to be available, and so the slides will be available all those who registered for the webinar. So we'll make sure that's out to you. I inadvertently turned off the recording when I was first starting, so we only caught the very back end of it. So, but I think most of the slides are pretty self-explanatory, but I'm sure Mike will welcome any of you calling him to explain any of the slides. Okay. Anything else? Any other last minute questions? Okay, Mike, well, we appreciate you. You're welcome to stay on if you'd like, but we thank you so much for providing this presentation to us, and something that everyone is dealing with, and it has huge financial implications. For those of you who have not, all those things that Mike mentioned, the PPP, the SBA loans, any stimulus stuff, the FEMA grants, I encourage all of you to apply for those if you haven't done so already, because this is extremely important for the future of your organization. So okay, here's another question. Any lessons learned from states that are farther along in the process? Like I always think of New York because they were sort of the epicenter for quite a while. So anything?
I think, so I was talking to some of the folks we have kind of in the Northeast part of our practice. So really Boston, New York, Philadelphia. And I think what we're seeing is a similar response of most communities are in lockdown. There's only one client I know of that kind of actively said they're going to take COVID patients, and they basically set up, because the way their building was structured, kind of an isolation wing, and is kind of actively participating. Otherwise, I would say the response that we tend to hear right now is more of probably a shutdown than it is to say, we're going to openly take this. I think and this is why I go, data's got a shelf life, because I think one of the things we thought when we saw this, or we started talking through this internally, is as the health system saw a surge, would that automatically assume that skilled nursing was going to have to take some of this on? So even in some of our assumptions, I don't know that it's panning out the way that we initially simulated in terms of, kind of hospital beds, kind of full hospital beds overflowing into skilled nursing facilities. But I think those are the things so I would say what I'm hearing in Texas isn't very different than what I'm hearing in the Northeast. But I think that's where some of probably assumptions and reality are panning out a little on some different tracks.
Yeah, I mean, we have heard of different localities sort of designating specific facilities as COVID facilities, and just in a couple of parts of the state. I think most people or most places that I've heard of trying to stay COVID free, primarily because they don't want to risk any other residents getting the infection, and they lack a lot of the supplies, the PPE and testing and all those other things that go along with having COVID residents in your facility. So I would, and we're continuing to pound the state about getting more PPE and testing, et cetera. If we're going to be in the front lines for a very vulnerable population, we need to do something about it. So, all right, Mike, well, thank you so much. And I'm going to, is Elise on the line? I think she is. Can you unmute yourself? And
Yep. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I have a few updates of some recent guidance and waiver approvals I wanted to bring to your attention and help answer any questions if you had some. First, many of you are aware that the governor last week approved the CNA training requirements, giving you some flexibility in hiring certified nurse aides with regard to training and demonstration of competency. We've also shared some training resources as well as competency checklists with members. Some of you had questions as to whether the state would be issuing any additional guidance or standards around those competency, around the demonstration of competency, as well as like approved training materials. The state does not plan on issuing any additional guidance at this time. So you, like I said, you have a lot of flexibility in your ability to train and assess competency, but please be sure that you are documenting everything as you transition and use these flexibilities as they're granted. And again, our resource page has some training materials that you're able to access, and we'll be sure to share any additional training materials that are released. This morning, CMS issued guidance on COVID-19 nursing facility transfer scenarios and waivers that were approved there. That resource has also been added to our webpage. And I would just direct you to, there's some good visuals with regard to movement of residents. And as George mentioned a couple minutes ago, certain counties and cities designating COVID positive facilities. We know this has happened in San Antonio. This has happened in Austin. We know that other counties such as Tarrant, Dallas, Harris, are also discussing designated COVID positive facilities, which means if you have a resident that were to test positive, the state could step in and determine that they needed to be transferred to this facility. So I want to make sure that you've reviewed that guidance. And we'll be sure to communicate any further discussion around these designated COVID positive facilities that are opening across the state. There's also been several questions that have come in related to providers designating certain areas within their facility to care for COVID positive or presumptive positive residents. I just want to clarify that if you're staying within your capacity, you may use existing rooms within the facility to designate those areas. If you have questions related to life safety or any concerns, you're encouraged to reach out to long-term care regulatory architecture to approve the expanded use of your facilities. And also just want to alert everyone that the state is also working on emergency rules for facilities to go over their existing capacity with some type of approval process, but those emergency rules are moving and should be granted within the next week or so. Shifting to questions related to potential increases in Medicaid reimbursement. So many of you are aware that first batch of Medicare dollars is being distributed, and some of you have seen that deposited into your account. This next week, and hopefully within the next couple weeks, we'll have a clearer picture of any potential Medicaid increases. We know that the state is in discussions around how to potentially distribute additional dollars to Medicaid providers. They're looking at costs that wouldn't otherwise be captured in cost reporting. So there's some pretty comprehensive analysis taking place. And as soon as we, receive any indication that providers can accept some type of Medicaid-related increase, we'll be sure to update you all. I just want to remind everyone that the state is now hosting the weekly nursing facility stakeholder and assisted living stakeholder calls. The assisted living facility calls are taking place on Wednesdays. That registration link went out just a couple hours ago. And then the nursing facility calls will be hosted on Fridays moving forward. And then just within the last couple of hours, there was some additional guidance related to PASAR for Medicaid certified nursing facilities, and the level 1 and 2 screenings being suspended for 30 days. So I wanted to draw your attention to that. And the last update I have is related to child care assistance. So last week, I mentioned that the state was rolling out some resources for frontline healthcare workers related to child care. That website is now live. We'll post it on the resource page. It is frontlinechildcare.texas.gov. It launched late last week, and there are several resources for both employees and employers to link their staff with child care resources in the area. That's all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
We did get a question about where do you register for those AL and IL calls with the state?
I believe we're posting them under the webinar section of our coronavirus resource page. I don't know that we've posted them yet for this week, so they'll be on there shortly, but you can also directly access them from the state's website. If you go under the Texas HHSC section of our resource page, that very first link, frequent updates, is where all the provider related communications are posted. So as those are sent out, they'll be live on the frequent updates link. But make sure, and I keep reiterating this, you know, the means of communication for the state is Gov Delivery. So if you're not subscribed, or if you're not sure you're subscribed, make sure you go into Gov Delivery and subscribe by provider type, whichever pertains to you.
Okay, thank you. I also came to mind, and last week we announced that there was a big increase in equip thing that was approved by the state. And how soon will that money start flowing out to facilities in the QUIP program?
So that funding pool increase was actually for fiscal year 2021. So it won't be this fiscal year. Yeah, it's just increasing the pool for 2021.
Okay. All right. Also have any other questions for Elise, or any regulatory or questions around that? Okay. Anne, do you want to give us a quick update of what's going on with PPE?
Thing. My first update is regarding the American Knit Value First mask order. Those of you that had ordered those masks for your residents and non-clinical staff, those shipments are starting to go out this week. They're going to be shipped FedEx and UPS, and the shipping time is around 2 to 3 days. So I wanted to highlight that. I also wanted to let you know that when you receive your final invoice / receipt paid in full, there is a ship date that's on that document. So that lets you know when they're being shipped out. So for those of you that might be interested in ordering from American Knit for those reusable masks, the turnaround time is about 2 weeks. So, and you're seeing that we're seeing the orders that were initially placed 2 weeks ago shipping out now. Also, I identified a source for, they actually have several categories. It's Ionized LLC. They have multiple categories, but they happen to have the KN95s in stock right now. that information is going to be on how to order is going to be sent out. It was sent out last week, but we're going to send it out again as a reminder in the morning, and how you can place an order for them. Like I said, they have multiple categories, and not all are in stock, but the KN95s are. I also wanted to let you know that both Vizient, our national GPO partner, as well as Value First, are working on opportunities for masks as well as gowns. Those updates are going to be going out via our PPE alert. So make sure that your community is receiving those notifications. If you haven't, just reach out to Juliana or myself, and we'll make sure that you get added. I also wanted to thank our communities. I'm starting to receive a lot of feedback on where you've been able to find PPE sources. So in addition to what we've been able to find on our own through our resources, our communities are now sending in those options as well. So I wanted to thank you. Lastly, what we are looking for actively now is obviously get masks, gowns, face shields, hand sanitizer, the sanitation, the wipes, the disinfectant wipes, as well as thermometers. So if there's anything that I haven't mentioned, please reach out to me and I will be a resource for you.
And can you also mention, isn't there a survey that we're asking people to complete on their PPE needs?
Yeah, the Value First also sent out a survey that has been shut down. That they sent the word out. We heard from about 15 communities, I believe. So and that would have come directly from Value First. So I want to make sure that we're addressing all the needs that you are. I've also out of those 15 communities, I was already speaking with 10. So I definitely want to make sure that we're reaching every need that you have. Also, through some feedback from some of our members, Value First is also, they're at the beginning stages, but they're also looking at doing a bulk buy or some sort of order on thermometers. So that was an addition as well. But
Okay.
they are actively looking at masks and gowns right now. And they've done some surveys around those too. So more to come.
Okay, thank you, Ann. Okay, just now's the time to open it up for general questions or comments, and anything you need, and any stories to share. We'd love to hear them. Okay, actually, I got a question probably for Elise here. Is there a requirement to post COVID positives on our website? I assume meaning the community's website. You can't find it in the any communication from the agency. I think that you have to report it to the public health department, but I don't think it has to be posted on your own website.
No, so there isn't a statewide requirement to post on your website. Dallas County is requiring that you post that you have a COVID positive case in your facility on your website. This hasn't been done in Harris County, to my knowledge. And I'm not sure if this is a requirement in Montgomery County, but Dallas County is the only one I'm aware of that has a local order requiring this.
Okay, yeah, that was confirmed by Brian and some Christian Care, Kim, also. It depends on the county. Okay. A couple of things. Want to say that next week we're going to have somebody come in from Morrison and talk about dining and some of the best practices, infection control, just creating the best experience for residents given all this that is going on. So next Tuesday we're going to have a session on that. Also wanted to say that on Friday, we're going to, well, let me take that back. Thursday, we're going to have a pop-up webinar on tax strategies and economic recovery for healthcare organizations. So some similar stuff to what we talked about today, but maybe some updated strategies for how to recover from a disaster like this, because this is basically a slow moving hurricane that's moving like an inch an hour, it seems like. So anyway, any other questions or concerns?
George, this is Rodney.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
You can.
All right. So I've got a question. We applied for the PPP money and we got ours last Thursday. I guess my question is, with all the various programs out there, or is it advisable to apply to multiple programs, or do we kind of, pick and choose and be more selective on what we commit ourselves to?
Well, I may defer to Corey on this. I'm looking at Corey, but or Elise, but I think you should apply to as many as possible, just because these are a lot of these programs are funded by stimulus dollars and are meant for continuing operations. So I don't know what the legalities or the pitfalls are of applying to multiple sources. I think most people are applying to multiple sources as far as I know, but I don't know.
The only thing I would add, George, and that I'm aware of, is I know that with the direct loan under, I can't think of the name, but it's basically, there was the Paycheck Protection, and the one that had very similar provisions, sort of a direct loan from the SBA. The main difference being that it wasn't forgivable, but you could get a $10,000 advance on it. That one and the Paycheck Protection Plan are intertwined in the sense that you can't do both of them. You can take the SBA direct one and then kind of roll it in to a paycheck protection loan. So that's the only one I know that, where you're restricted from doing both. But in general, I agree with George's sentiment of trying to get as many as you can, and that you can meet the terms of.
Yeah, well, and those were the two I'd looked at, and I knew they're kind of conflicting interests, and so to speak. So the PPP was the best one for us to do, but I haven't looked that closely at all the other things out there.
Yeah, I think that the big difference was the huge difference is the forgivability, and that SBA direct loan isn't forgivable except for that $10,000.
Right.
Yeah, it's called the EIDL, I think.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
And we've actually applied for that here at LeadingAge Texas, but I think those loans are not forgivable, but they carry like a 1% interest after 6 months. I don't think there's any payment required for 6 months. So, but yeah, the PPP sounds like a much better program because it is entirely forgivable.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, we thank you all for joining, and
there's a question.
okay.
It's a question from the group. Has anyone had to pay any employee paid sick leave under the FSCRA? And were they able to receive a tax credit by offsetting their 941 deposit?
We have not had that circumstance yet.
Has anyone on the call? Okay. I guess not yet is the answer.
I'll submit that to the HR peer group for some feedback.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Don't forget the webinar on Thursday, the pop-up webinar, and then be back next week for talking about dining services. Thanks all for joining, and stay safe for you, your staff, and your residents.